last session of the day. I'm a writer and editor, and HKA focuses exclusively on quantum. So I get to talk to healthcare innovators and people working in chemistry and all kinds of fascinating applications of this technology. So we're going to start with a couple specific questions to each individual, and then we'll go to some general questions, and of course we'll have time at the end for anything that you all want to know more about. And I'll ask you to introduce yourself since you know your bio better than me, but I guess since the Mayo Clinic, what's the best way for an entrepreneur to get in to connect with all the researchers and experts at Mayo Clinic?
Well, thank you, Veronica, and hi, everybody. My name's Charles Bruce. I'm originally from South Africa. I've been at Mayo Clinic since 1994. I'm a cardiologist. I'm also the Chief Innovation Officer for Mayo Clinic in Florida, and I'm also the Assistant Medical Director for Business Development. And I work with Jennie, who's going to introduce herself shortly, and that's the best way to get hold of anybody.
How about, I think technology experts sometimes have difficulty working with doctors. Do you have any do's and don'ts for working with doctors? That's a more maybe.
You're not letting me. Well, all right. I will speak. I will. So then I will speak a little bit more. We've come to recognize at Mayo that innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so you need three core ingredients. One is you need people. You need to, because if you don't have people, you don't have ideas. So you need to attract, retain, and then you need to polish the talent. The second is you need to have a world-class ecosystem of resources. And those resources shouldn't just be a bland inventory. They need to be able to be activated at a notice. And so we have intentionally, and this is part of the reason we're here today, is to build up and strengthen that inventory of resources, because the third thing is the innovation exchange. You need to be able to connect then the best ideas with a very specific resource to help bring that idea move further along to reality so it can benefit people at scale as quickly as possible. And that's our goal. Our goal is to bring discoveries to people so it can benefit them as quickly as possible. Because so many people are dying out there because they just weren't lucky enough to get the FDA to approve the therapy in time. So there's a sense of urgency to do that. So the Innovation Exchange serves as an idea concierge, and it basically connects an idea from inside or outside our organization. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an innovator outside of Mayo Clinic, and you feel that Mayo Clinic could perhaps help you bring your idea to benefit people, please contact us, because we would then consider you as a member of the Innovation Exchange and then introduce you to a resource within our ecosystem. And the same if you're a Mayo employee. So that's basically, I think, the best way that you're able to engage with us.
So healthcare was one of the last industries to sort of have digital technology roll over it. And when I worked with entrepreneurs, the joke was sort of like, if you don't have a reimbursement code, there's no way your innovation will get into the system, right? Because if a doctor can't write, or a nurse or a pharmacist or a physical therapist can't write the reimbursement code, then you can't get paid for your work. So that's why the exchange seems so promising to me, because it's that door. You don't need a code, you just need an idea, like you said, and a way to get into the Mayo Clinic to talk to all the healthcare experts who don't know quantum but know people and illness. So
yeah, and we've already met so many people that we're going to make introductions to.
Right. Exactly. Jennie, do you want to explain how the exchange might work?
Yeah, so thank you so much for this opportunity to share that. And really if there's anything you take away from today, from this moment, as you walk out that door, it's if you are yourself an innovator, you're a founder, an entrepreneur, you work for a company that is doing really amazing things, you think at all there's any type of application to healthcare, please contact the Innovation Exchange, truly. Because what it takes is taking things that may not necessarily look like they have application to healthcare. That's what's going to change healthcare. That's exactly what's going to change healthcare. So we're not doing the same thing over and over and over again. Dr. Bruce did a great job of basically giving an idea of how the exchange works. But what we really do is we really want to accelerate. We know that innovation is sort of a perilous journey, whether or not you're an innovator yourself or you're trying to make a difference. And so we're really focused on accelerating, making those connections faster and getting to that next point. So please reach out if you have colleagues in this space, if you have friends in this space. What we're really trying to do is get our arms really around sort of what this quantum stuff is, lean into your expertise, and then see what we can do via partnerships together, collaborations together, lean onto sort of our own strengths and come together as a stronger sort of unit to innovate together. And so a little bit about myself. I spent actually still more than half of my career outside of healthcare, actually. Spent some time in consulting, capital markets, investment management sector. And then I worked for the Walt Disney Company, where I got to work really closely with a group called the Imagineers. So a little bit of a nod to the sort of the health and, like engineering, partnered with the creativity, partnered with some of the things that spark innovation at the Walt Disney Company, and really took a lot of those types of experiences with me into healthcare, where I now have the fortune to work with folks like Dr. Bruce, incredible inspirations in healthcare to really make a difference. So very, very passionate about this. Please reach out at any time.
So Merlin now is with Siemens, and my question for you is, how did quantum get started at your company? Because your company, Siemens, has been around a long time, a very established medical company.
I mean, Siemens obviously has been around for ages, and we were doing all sorts of stuff, and Siemens Healthineers is just the healthcare part, which is a separate company though. How it all got started basically, so if you've attended my talk, I'm still a PhD student, so the work that I'm pursuing right now, it's part of my PhD project, and that's also how it started. The cooperation of Siemens and my university has been around for ages, but Hans Wicher, my boss at Siemens, he basically had the idea. They had a workshop at Siemens about new computing technologies, and he thought that it was really crucial to kind of dive deeper in quantum computing now, and that's basically how it started.
Do you have any advice for any health systems or health companies looking to get a team like that started?
I mean, I think you would probably just need time. You would need someone who is willing to spend time either working themselves into kind of the topic of quantum computing, or of course, get a talent that can do that sort of stuff. But learning about quantum computing is pretty easy nowadays. I mean, having everything available in the internet, you can pretty much teach yourself anything. And you also have access to a lot of open source stuff. You have access to simulators. You can create free accounts at most of the companies, try their computers out. So I would recommend everyone to do that. Even though you don't understand maybe coding, they will have tutorials on how to run their simple problems. It's just click and go. And I think that's one of the crucial parts, is actually trying it out. Otherwise, you will not learn about it.
Nardo and I talked last week about this panel, and he said, let's not use the word disruption, because healthcare has been disrupted enough, from wearables, and not to mention COVID-19. So Nardo, as you said, you've been in this industry quite a while. Are there lessons from this first wave of digital transformation that you think would apply to this? Like when doctors could see, your heartbeat information from your watch and your steps from your pedometer?
Well, I think the promise of quantum is basically our ability to reach the data processing speed that we need in order to process the amount of data that we have in healthcare. And I mean, if you were part of the in the talks earlier on the healthcare generates 30% of the data out there in the world, right? It's growing at 36% CAGR annually. So if you take a look at that, we definitely have a big problem, right? So the other part is, healthcare loves legacy systems. We have to actually need to have a really good process to transition out from, old legacy ways of doing things and basically looking into more innovative ways of doing things. We're doing a good job right now. I think quantum will push us to do a bit more in that space.
So I was glad you mentioned the envirome or the exposome, and I thought it might be interesting to talk about digital twins for a moment. So the social determinants of health is the idea that it's not the pills you take or your weight or your blood pressure, it's where you live, how much education you have, what your family history is like. So do you see the potential of a digital twin to tell about, like if you live next to a coal ash dump or you live
Yes.
next to a refinery? I mean, that's the kind of information you could have about a patient, or you can
Yes.
see what that effect might be on someone. Is that what you see?
It's
from
profound.
promise?
It's profound because it's not just in being able to make a diagnosis, it's also being able to actually identify therapies. Right now we're working in the dark, but with the Internet of Things, with our hyper-connected environment, the amount of information that we don't even consider to be healthcare data. For example, I got a call from Visa saying, Charles, Mr. Bruce, was that you buying snakeskin boots in Austin, Texas?
Was it?
No, because clearly that did not fit my pattern of behavior. I don't have snakeskin boots. And so what's interesting to me about that is there is what I would consider metadata that's not, again, considered traditional healthcare data that informs where I am, how much am I engaging, what words am I using in my conversations on my cell phone, what's the intonation of my voice, how am I breathing, how often am I exercising. These are not necessarily things that are being measured by a traditional biometric thing. So these determinants, if we're able to capture that information, it will inform us better about why some drugs don't work for everybody. Because it may be that we're throwing away really promising drugs because they don't apparently work, but we're not looking at them in the right population. And so the same could be told for why my particular genetic predisposition, similar to my children's, may be very different depending on where we grow up, what environmental exposures we were exposed to. So I think being able to amass all of that information and actually generate very individualized twins. So there's a Charles Bruce here that lives in Florida, and there's a Charles Bruce here that lives in San Jose, and there's a Charles Bruce, and you just have this whole list of Charles Bruces, all the way down there. And then from what exposures did my mother get exposed to in utero? How much did they smoke in the car with the windows closed? All of those impacted my responses, my genetic predisposition to these exposures. So that, I think, is the promise of something like quantum computing in the future.
And there's just no way to analyze that data now with our classical computers, right? That's why we don't collect it
I think it would be impossible. And just again to stress for those that all of that represents 70% of outcomes. The traditional healthcare data that we use to make decisions as doctors and healthcare providers only provides 30% of the healthcare outcome.
So, Nardo, how do you explain the quantum opportunity to healthcare companies? I mean, doctors and nurses and physical therapists are dealing with so much. Do you compare it to penicillin or the mapping of the genome? How do you put it in the right context?
Yeah, I think the way I normally explain it, because in healthcare sometimes the technology doesn't really matter, right? But the experience matters, right? So you tell them about, okay, well, what if this thing can basically replace this thing, so you could do more things that is more relevant to what you're doing. For example, part of the presentation I have was like an intelligent virtual nurse, right? That is an avatar that is connecting with the patient, and being a companion 24/7, for example. If we can make that real, then what happens from a healthcare standpoint, right? So now we have an issue with resources in healthcare. Now we basically said this technology can actually create a care companion, a health companion with everyone that's here in the room, right? So that changes healthcare quite a bit. And then the other part is like, well, what if you can get to understand all of that data without, and you have better clinical decision support? Can you do your job better? Are you helping, this is the way the technology is helping with, the quadruple aim that we're talking about, including the cost, the care experience, and the experience doesn't have to be just the patient. It has to be the caregiver, it has to be the clinicians, it has to be all of those different stakeholders that we have, right? So the way I explain it is impact and outcome, and how it helps them be better as opposed to I'm pushing quantum algorithms in your face and here you go, right?
And Jennie, I know you've worked some in hospital administration. Are there any use cases that pop to mind or any problems that,
So many.
could you share just a couple
So
to
many.
put
I
that
mean,
in
just
context?
from an operational perspective, just keeping a very complex, right? If you think of what you need to run a large medical system, a hospital, I mean, just from that perspective alone of, we were joking earlier about sort of the staffing issues and how you handle that and the algorithms there to do that. But a lot of it centers around being able to work not just faster, but smarter, right? Being informed. So not just having data at your fingertips, but having data that's actually actionable, that you can put into motion to improve the type of care that you can deliver to the patients, the type of experience that your staff will have. All of those are very, very important.
And Merlin, if you were, it seems like kind of an intimidating thing to tackle, figure out quantum computing for your healthcare system today. Is there an area, medical imaging or something that you would suggest people start off on just to put it in a context that would be relevant to them?
I think this really depends on like what area you're working in. So how we approached it basically was we took a look at what kind of quantum computing styles are out there, what kind of algorithms are out there, and how we can use these algorithms for the kind of problems that we have. We've now started off with like medical imaging, but there are other people who do this. You basically have a classical task and then you try it out with quantum. And I think that's maybe the first step to basically get used to the technology. It's not even about having some kind of advantage, but we want to make sure that we are, when it hits off, that we are ready, so that we have the expertise to kind of tell if something really is better or if it is not. Yeah.
I think that's such a great approach, honestly.
Yeah.
I think there couldn't be a more compelling, from what I consider myself a newbie now in quantum computing, and from what I've heard today, that seems like a very pragmatic approach, because what you're doing, and it's really what we are trying to do. Let's just jump in, let's understand this a little bit better, so that in fact when it does take off and when these remarkably intelligent people are figuring out how to actually make these things work, that we're the first movers. We can really just jump in and actually take advantage of it.
And I think that the digital twin example is like a really nice example in my opinion too. We work with patient twins is a big topic at Siemens as well. And I think, we have so many different kind of components that we want to model. We have digital twins at Siemens, for example, for modeling surgeries and like where to put screws and so on. But then you cannot put that into context with all of the other stuff that is out there. You could start from simulating the human on the molecular level, but the hard thing is like, putting it all together. And maybe we can find some help in quantum computing there too. Yeah. Someone said something about quantum causality earlier, and that really sparked my mind, and I want to dive deeper into that topic.
Yeah, that is another terrific opportunity, because so much with machine learning right now, the computer spits out an answer, and you think, well, how did you get to that? And then the FDA has to figure out, well, how did you get to that? And in fact, that's the promise. It's coming up with non-intuitive responses that humans couldn't come up with. But you have no way of figuring out, well, does that really make sense? Mm-hmm. I think the ability to actually track back and figure out sort of the provenance of how you got to that answer, I think is terrific. If I understood the idea of quantum causality appropriately.
Yeah, I think then the other thing is teaching people about quantum computing and why that actually works. So there's also a great bit in there.
So it's not a black box where you can't explain the results, yes. I guess one thing that jumped to my mind was sort of the idea of the first line of prescription, like with antidepressants, there's a first line of treatment that everybody gets. But with a digital twin, perhaps you could say,
exactly.
well, this genomic profile, maybe this is the first medication and this is the next, and things like that. So
yeah, and I think the other thing too is like the concept of in silico clinical trials, where you're actually using digital twin data and digital drug data, combine them to see what the results are before you even get into clinical trials. So you could do a lot of risk mitigation. You could, take a look at that and say, okay, well, do I even have to bear the cost of doing human trials? Do this first, right? So we're going to speed up a lot of that stuff.
Healthcare is a little bit different than other industries in the sense of there's HIPAA and there's obviously personal information that maybe, I don't want anyone else to know my risk of cancer or my genetic background. What do you all see as sort of the ethical or the moral issues around quantum computing and healthcare? Are there any guardrails we need to put in place now before it gets away from us?
That's an awesome question. Yeah, and I think, we already have a lot of work being done in AI and ethics, right? So think of like, okay, well, what happens if you layer this level of capability on top of AI? Then what happens, right? So we're going to have things. We're going to get outcomes and results that we don't even know about. So how do we deal with that, right? So I think the others are. Because quantum it's a nature-based system, and humans, we're probably more aligned towards being a quantum system, and that kind of capability is more aligned towards what we are. We're going to find use cases that we've never seen before. For example, a lot of exploration in what we call quantum biology, right? So if that, if innovation shows in that area, we're going to find ourselves like in a lot of these very ethical questions that we're going to have to ask, right? So for example, there was a startup that pitched to me that basically said, I'm doing quantum and genomics, so I could, I'm intersecting quantum AI and CRISPR. I said, okay, that's an interesting intersection because now, with gene editing and genomic engineering, what can you do with that, right? So there's a lot of ethical questions that comes along with, it's not just the technology, but to deploy it, there's all these things that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I think one issue is maybe just to flip it a little bit is that the risks that quantum computing relates to data security, and particularly because of the concepts of being able to manipulate Dick Cheney's defibrillator from a distance, for example, or just really causing havoc with our healthcare system in being able to unlock the keys that we rely on in keeping all this information confidential. So I think that there's an imperative to actually really understand quantum computing as it applies to data security, and particularly within healthcare. Now, obviously, it's being addressed in fintech and others, but it goes without saying that this is really a critical element of, and probably will require a whole field of its own in how to address it. I don't know, Nardo, whether there are efforts already underway to do that.
Yeah, so there's we have post-quantum cryptography company that are basically tackling the healthcare problems. So that thing is happening now. We have a lot of work happening on the federal side. And trying to select, the best cryptographic algorithm to apply. I think that the conversation needs to be more on, one thing to replace a technology, and healthcare is allergic to replace, because when you're talking about healthcare, what you don't want to do is, again, that word disrupt, right? Because the moment you're tearing something and replacing something, you're disrupting the operations, and that means patients' lives are at stake. So what you want to do is when you build solutions and products in this space, you have to look at it from how does it work within the confines and the constraints of healthcare. So instead of replace, maybe it works in conjunction to what's already there.
Jennie, this might be a good time for you to tell us about the exchange and how it might fit in, or if I know you said you had lots of doctors who were interested in working with entrepreneurs, and what was that number? $1 billion a year in research and education?
Over
budget?
$1 billion.
Over $1 billion
In research and education.
How can someone get in and work with your doctors? How do you see the exchange working?
Yeah, so a few really interesting things about the exchange. You've heard us not to beat the horse dead really here, but the exchange is a really fantastic portal into Mayo Clinic for collaboration with Mayo's, if I understand the question correctly, researchers and physicians and doctors who are really already looking at solving and researching maybe specific areas. And the exchange makes those connections, like we were talking about earlier, faster for the purposes of accelerating the discoveries faster. And there are a lot of different ways we do that. There's a very interconnected internal ecosystem within Mayo Clinic. We're in the process of even building out our digital infrastructure to facilitate those connections in a very quick, speedy, and accurate way. But to really answer sort of like how you make those connections in, the exchange helps to facilitate that based upon, the needs, the opportunities, the sort of the right fit, even going down to finding the sort of the right match, down to a specific physician, not just like a department or anything like that. So we get questions like that a lot, and we end up making a direct connection to a physician that yields a very, very fruitful partnership or collaboration.
And Mayo has already made investments in artificial intelligence and machine learning, so there's sort of that established groundwork for that kind of innovation anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about the innovation exchange too, it's sort of agnostic to, like, if you think about healthcare innovation, you might think, depending on your perspective, it might be more med tech or might be a specific area, but the exchange is sort of agnostic to all of that. So depending on the innovation, the door is truly open.
And maybe one thing just to emphasize too, so that it's not, is that because we're philanthropically funded, our incentives are not to send or direct work or opportunities to us or to Mayo Clinic. It may well be that there's someone here who's actually needs a resource that's MIT. We'll just make the connection. So it's a platform opportunity. It really, the only measure by which we are judged is how good did we make the connection.
And I did want to touch on your work also, Merlin, just in terms of imaging and how what's quantum's relation to imaging and how that would help with healthcare.
So I think when we talk about imaging, you cannot only see it from a healthcare point, because imaging is everywhere. You have a smartphone, there's imaging in there. You have holography display systems work the same way as imaging systems do, but the reverse way, kind of. So this research in quantum computing about image processing is just getting started. And there are a lot of people actually who are diving into that now to actually, have that available when it gets ready. In terms of healthcare, I think that it will be healthcare is always a little bit later than the other industries. This is like due to like the regulations and stuff. But I think that once it's available, sure, medical imaging is going to use that technology if there's an advance.
So if I may ask, what's the topic of your PhD? What is your specialty in terms of this?
Yeah, so basically I'm investigating quantum computing for emission tomography. Reconstruction topics of imaging, but honestly in our team we also work with all kinds. So we're starting at the image formation level, how we actually get the images of the patient to the system, then the 3D image reconstruction, which I was talking about, but we are also interested in clinical workflows, how can we improve those sort of things. So there's really a lot of application cases that you could tackle.
I think I'm an imager in cardiology. I do ultrasound imaging of the heart. And one of there are two aspects to it. There's the technical aspect of actually acquiring the images with a transducer that requires a very skilled sonographer. It requires a lot of training. And then there's a second component, which is the integration of all that imaging to make a diagnosis based on those images. And the thing is that unlike CT or MRI, the image that you get from ultrasound can be influenced by ribs and artifact and acoustic shadowing, and maybe someone's a little bigger. And so the image data is not uniform. Just imagine a day when you just basically get a volume image with the ultrasound, and the quantum computing actually figures it out and does it really quickly. Talk about efficiency. It would be, and it's done in a completely objective, repeatable manner. I think that the opportunities for imaging and quantum computing and imaging are really vast.
That's actually a very interesting point. So the device that I've shown you earlier is a SPECT scanner. And if I would show you a photo of a cardiac SPECT scan, to most of you, you wouldn't see anything. You know, it really takes a lot of experience to be able to read those images. Even we at Siemens, we have problems, you know, reading these images correctly. We need the expertise of the, you know, doctors who have been doing this for years. And this is also, I think, one crucial point that we have to like keep in the back of our head is always, or at Siemens, we always think, you know, what is the value for the doctor? Will it improve the workflow? Will it not? We can make nicer images if they don't help the doctor identifying the disease better. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no point. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very good good point. Yeah.
I was working on an asthma project once, and there was a tracker that you could put on top of your inhaler, and it would send an alert whenever you needed your rescue inhaler, and you could link it to the weather and where you were in town, and do you live next to a coal-fired power plant. And one of the doctors I talked to said, I can't process this. This is nice, but I don't want your data. So as an innovator, you're like, what do you mean you don't want my data? But I think the point of making it actionable, I think maybe you mentioned actionable, not just the data sitting there, but what do I do with this and how does it relate to this individual and not just population health. So, well, we're getting a little close to the end. Nardo, when you're looking ahead to 2023, what are you keeping your eye on, or what would you like to see happen next year in terms of progress in quantum and healthcare?
Well, I definitely want to see healthcare in the map, right? So I think we need an increase in this industry, just because there's a lot of data and there's a lot of interest in there's a lot of AI work happening. And I think there's so many challenges in the space that you could tackle it even way beyond just, you know, quantum computing, right? So looking into hybrid technologies, classical and quantum working together to solve problems, looking into quantum sensing, you know, looking at these new level of sensors so we can, you know, things like, oh, if I have a brain sensor that can track, you know, a single spark of neuron that, so it traverses towards, you know, what's happening in the brain, then basically now it gives you new diagnostic tools. So I'm hopeful that, you know, these shorter term quantum, I would say, technologies, as opposed to just the computing aspect of it, will have a significant impact. And hopefully we get to see a lot more startups looking in that space. Mm-hmm. I gave a list of like 25, 30 different use cases that I'd like to see startups in. And if you guys are interested in that, let me know, because I'd like to see some startups coming up in that space.
What about you, Merlin? Will you finish your PhD in this coming year?
No, I will not. It was scheduled for 2024.
Okay.
So I'm always excited for new quantum technologies because the field, so when I started getting involved, I just knew about IBM. That was the only company I knew that was doing quantum computing. And I had to get my head a little bit around like what kind of companies are out there. Algorithm companies, hardware companies. So I'm always curious about, you know, how these companies develop new methods and how I can use those methods. So for example, there's also a company called QEra. They were speaking on Thursday. Yeah. And this is a new, kind of a new concept, and their technology to me seems pretty applicable to some cases. And I'm always keen to see, new ideas. I mean, I'm a researcher. I read a lot of papers. There's a lot of people doing research on the exact same thing. It's just getting started, but there are people doing it. So yeah, I have my eyes everywhere.
So Jennie, what do you hope the exchange looks like a year from now?
Well, I can, being here is just so incredibly inspiring. And Nardo mentioned earlier today that we really only know, 5 to 10% of
the use cases
for quantum. And with the list that he provided, it's just incredibly, I think, motivating, and really is a, lights a fire for action in terms of what I think the exchange can do in terms of helping to build that bridge for use cases in healthcare to change the lives for patients around the world. And I say that very, very seriously, because I think when there's sort of these winds of change, and I know some of you have been in quantum for forever, it's new for us. And so with these winds of change, you can either build a wall or you can build a windmill, right? And I think the exchange really wants to be that windmill to kind of propel this and really start to make a very broad impact for lives everywhere.
So you won't be a quantum newbie this time a year from now. You'll know a little bit more.
No, I'll be
than
an
you do
expert.
now. What are you looking ahead for in the new year in terms of your work? And
I just hope that this technology saves maybe just one person's life, or that's it. That would be
That's
my
enough.
hope.
yes. Are there any questions? We have some time left. Anyone want to ask?
I like the discussion about imaging and its applications. I think you can hear me, but anyway, Ravi Kiran from Merck, Germany. I like the discussion about imaging and its application. The challenge is the timeline to impact and the affordability. So we're just talking about the US. What about the rest of the world? You need specialist doctors, you need equipment that costs millions of dollars. So how do we make that happen?
We don't have any financing people on our panel, so, well, I mean, one way to think of it is if Mayo has the resources to, with all those patients and all that data, some of these solutions could be shared with other health systems that you maybe would build some of the solutions.
Not only
and then
share. So the way I
pass on.
see that is, so I have a passion for remote monitoring. We developed a remote monitoring platform. It is a Band-Aid style sensor. I grew up in South Africa from a resource-constrained environment, having the opportunity of moving to America, working at Mayo Clinic. It's the pinnacle of healthcare. The goal is that not everyone can come to Mayo Clinic for care. But with remote monitoring, people can have access around the world to expertise when needed. So for example, technologies that we're using to look at electrocardiograms and apply machine learning to be able to make diagnoses that would require expensive imaging tools, like an echocardiogram. Now we can determine whether someone has heart failure, what their ejection fraction is, based on a single lead ECG. That's low cost. So that has implications for people in very rural communities. So I would maybe say that this technology actually has the ability to actually, yes, it may be expensive, maybe we have to invest a lot of money into it, but ultimately, I think it's going to, sorry Nardo, it's going to disrupt healthcare.
Well, it might expand access to care. in different
Absolutely,
ways
I
we
mean,
don't
that would be
know now.
and that would be the goal. It would be, I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
I just want to add to that, because if you take a look at what's happening in the healthcare innovation side of things, we have startup companies that are miniaturizing ultrasounds, MRI machines and stuff like that, right? So you could take a look at those and say, gosh, if, for example, like Butterfly IQ, right? So you have like this device that you could bring to India, to bring to a third world country, and that costs like a couple of $100. So think of something like that and say, okay, well, what if I do, an onboard chip that has an AI processing unit in there that can both process classical and some quantum algorithms within an onboarded chip, right? So now, okay, it may be a little bit more expensive because of the quantum aspect of it, but it's still not going to break the bank, right? So I think what we don't want to do is get stuck in, okay, we have to recreate it again, right? So healthcare, we're so good at that. We love creating new wheels and things like that, right? So I think for what we want to do is, there's a lot of innovation that we can already layer this technology on. We just need to keep that piece of it and work on that, as opposed to let me build a new thing.
Yeah, I would also, I really, I would agree definitely with you. I would just like to add, so I think quantum computing has the abilities to enhance low-cost techniques which are already out there. And I think that would be a crucial point. Not only that, but also quantum computing can be used to run some kind of optimization problem which may be useful for like a very, very big problem. let's take clinical workflows, for example. If you could run that kind of optimization problem on the quantum computer, maybe you run it, I don't know, 2-3 times a week or something, and that would still give you a lot of benefit in terms of time and money saving.
Others.
How are you preparing to add in computer scientists, data scientists, and people that are trained in quantum computing to use healthcare effectively? I mean, these are very different skill sets that need to be matched together in a way that makes sense, that's also affordable.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I've got to take away from today, is that I'm going back and I'm ensuring that we address that. We need a talent pipeline, and obviously, the academic institutions are training the physicists and whatever you folks are, the engineers that are developing these technologies. We need to help our medical staff understand how we can start speaking that language and start helping understand how we can bring this technology to benefit patients. So I think it's critically important. I think it's important because if we don't start educating people now, they won't be ready in time for when, in fact, all these bright people have solved the logical qubit. So.
Yeah, being able to start building these collaborations and these partnerships between the academic institutions and places like ours, where it's coming into practice, and being able to keep building these bridges, sort of a theme of what we're talking about today. Making these connections, building these bridges, talking earlier, moving these conversations upstream so that we are building these pipelines, building out that funnel. Yep.
So I do see, I often get invited to talk to a lot of universities in terms of their computer science department, right? So there's a need for this industry to basically have the computer scientists and the quantum physicists and researchers to talk to, right? Because it's an integration of these disciplines. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have to layer the industry component, right? So now we're talking about 3 different languages that we need to kind of put together and make sense of that. So, the reason why, Mayo is here and, Siemens is here is, let's create that language, because right now we don't have that language. And we're starting to get it in pharma, we're starting to get it in finance. I think it's about time we do it in healthcare, mainly because, we have a lot more data, we have a lot of different challenges, and the opportunities are just vast.
Yeah, I think also there's been quite some progress made by companies making quantum computing easier to understand for people that know how to code, but they don't have any expertise in quantum mechanics. I think what you said, having an interdisciplinary team, is very, very important. But for example, I did my undergrad in medical engineering, then kind of went more to computer science, and in the end I kind of dove a little bit deeper into quantum computing. So I think, yeah, interdisciplinary, that's a very important thing, that you talk to everyone, get all the different views and opinions.
What would you suggest?
Any last questions? I think we're just about, one more question in the back.
Yeah, so my company has been pretty fortunate to work with a number of doctors, and they've been able to work with IBM Watson systems and others in the past. And, to them, it was really frustrating that these systems didn't really work. So my question to the Mayo Clinic folks is, I know that you're talking about adding more computer scientists and data scientists to your pipeline, but how else do you hope to educate the doctors in terms of this new technology, not just quantum, but any technology that's computerized moving forward?
That's such a critical question, and it's something that's a pet sort of passion of mine, is understanding what does a healthcare team of the future look like. We're practicing medicine if it's the 1800s. I would argue that you don't need to be bright to be a doctor. In fact, I think it's a problem. So what we need is to reimagine what a healthcare team of the future looks like. And a machine is a component of that team. And then someone who understands how that machine works and runs, together with the researchers and scientists. So the healthcare team just looks different, and we need to address that. And I think that there is a dearth of data scientists in healthcare because we are non-profit. We cannot compete with the Googles and the Amazons and the Apples. we have to figure out a way of how we can attract and inspire folks who get sucked by the financial rewards of working for institutions like that and have them work for a higher mission, healthcare. And so when we get that right, when we can attract the best and brightest data scientists to come and work in healthcare, and if any of you can help me figure out how we message that, all I can say is it's very rewarding to work in healthcare, because there's nothing better than being able to look at someone and say, don't worry, ma'am, your daughter's going to be just fine. It's not the same as having Steve Jobs' boat, floating around Barbados, but it's a very, very warm feeling.
Well, I think that's a great way to end our conversation. So thank you all for coming and sharing your knowledge and inspiration, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much.